Welcome to episode 3 of the Think Different podcast. Today I have with me the program manager of the Pathfinder program at Art Smart Education, Daniel Dummer.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks for being here today. As the program manager of the Pathfinder program, a mentoring program that supports students to maximize their study and well-being while preparing for life after school, what do you think are the most important skills a person needs to develop as early as possible?
I think there's sort of two baskets of things that we ask of students normally. And the first is how they can succeed within school. And most of the information about that you get from your teachers and sometimes from your parents or older siblings about when you need to knuckle down and nail study or when you need to prepare for exams and things like that. And there's no doubt that part of succeeding for a young person means working at how you personally navigate that school environment and the expectations around that, which are different for everyone, and different people are made differently to be able to make the most of that environment. But I think that's the first set of struggles. And for young people, I think it's not just a matter of trying to mold yourself into like the perfect academic student. Like there's just one way to do that. I think instead the sort of mindset for success in that environment is more about setting your own goals for yourself and working out what success looks like for you as a school student. The second set of skills I think that are useful for young people is to keep an eye on what's going to happen after school. And I don't just mean, be able to answer by age 18 exactly what you want to do with your life and, have all those questions sorted and fixed and final. But instead, it's about thinking about, what are the sorts of interests I have and the sorts of problems I want to learn more about and maybe contribute to. And how can I begin preparing myself in small ways to begin to move in some of those directions later. So that sort of set of skills can mean really little things like saying yes to more opportunities or looking more expansively at your co-curricular or maybe looking for meeting on family and friends to try and get some work experience somewhere. It can simply be a matter of research. But I think it's a matter of, you might call the skill being outward looking, taking an interest in the world outside the school walls. And it's not just like the skill of public speaking or the skill of, communicating better or, those things. It's just sort of a worldview, I think, where you start taking interest in the world around you.
Well, on that topic, how would you recommend that students actually gain clarity on their future direction and plan after they leave school?
I think it begins with those questions you ask yourself about how do I just want to begin taking that interest. So it can be a matter of the things you Google or the YouTube channels or social media that you're looking at, the news sources that you read about, or it can be simply things that take your interest in the local community. But it's about making a decision to find out a bit more, to work out who's in that space or those spaces that interest me at the moment, and how can I meet some of them? Because so much of the information and the context and where all the magic happens in those things that you might be interested in isn't contained on just on a Wikipedia page or something, but it's held in the brains of the people who are living and breathing it every day. So if you can find ways to move yourself towards those people and have a conversation on the periphery of some networking event or some convention, some gathering, some online Zoom call, people are meeting and chatting about all these areas every day. So if you can find a way to just tune into that conversation, that's probably the first step. Just push yourself towards a little bit.
Cold contacting everyone you can find.
It's not necessarily even cold contacting, but it might be, warm cat contacting, if you like. It might be, a friend of a friend, or if there's been a family member who's always been chatting about a thing at dinner table, or your parents are always saying, oh yeah, your uncle does this, or your cousin's doing that, or if it's, you've just been reading your school newsletter and, the social justice committee has been doing something different lately. if you go to church and there's a community that they're doing work on, it's just a matter of doing something with those things that have been bubbling away in the back of your mind.
Well, with the future of work constantly changing, is there a way for students to foolproof themselves during this planning?
So I'd be wary of a word like foolproof, only because,
Okay,
no, I don't criticism the question at all, but, I think obviously, more uncertain world, we all want what's the most certain thing I can get. And the reality, of course, is that it's more about how do I just move myself into a better position rather than a worse one.
Yeah.
And if you can, I think you can position yourself well in a couple of ways. One is to look at the areas of greatest need in society that are going to have the biggest changes and disruption. And, it won't surprise anyone right now that there's a lot of growth in areas of like medicine and biotech and medical research, healthcare services. That's one really obvious example in the middle of a pandemic, where if those interests you have, well, then take the broadest view you can about where are my interests in this big field. And once you narrowed it down, that's just one example, but whatever your interest might be, look at where that field is heading and what sorts of things people do to just become a little bit, you might say, literate in the way it operates at a ground level. And that's sort of another way of saying something practical in like a project you undertake that might involve some research into it, or whether it's meeting some people who are at the ground level of it, because so much of those opportunities comes from having a bit of a network and having a bit of a demonstrated interest, not just writing on a resume, this is something that I'm in, I have a passion for X, Y, or Z, but rather being like, hey, I've undertaken a project, or I've been reading about, or I've been talking to people about this, and I want to take a next step with it. Maybe the second thing I'd say is that there's not really one set of skills or expertises that employers are looking for. Very often, the highest growth areas are coming at the intersection of different areas. So one thing we talk about in the Pathfinder program is the trend of hybridization. That is where the people who are making the greatest difference in these fields and having the greatest impact are having it because they're not someone who specialized early and narrowly in that particular field, but instead they actually spent some of their early career sampling various different sorts of fields, doing a bit of a taste test maybe of something in science, maybe something in communications, maybe something in research, just as examples. And then towards the 5 or 10 year mark in their career, they made one more sort of change and then found that they were having an outsized contribution in their field because the people in that field all sort of thought the same way after a decade or so of specialization. But somebody who was bringing more diverse experience came in and had a bunch of different mental frames and a bunch of different ideas from different areas that they could reapply in a new context and make some breakthroughs and make a kind of surprisingly big contribution given their experience. So as the world becomes more complex and these trends in work become more competitive in different sectors, often the people who are most successful are those who have broad experience rather than narrow.
With most people following a very similar course of like going through school, university, and then into work, what are some strategies that could be used to overcome the competitive nature of society and increase your own individuality to make yourself stand out? Yeah,
how do you individually stand out? So I think the first thing is that no one person's path is going to look the same, and I wouldn't want anyone to take away from this conversation the idea that the more you can cram in, the better off you're going to be, that it's a cramming game, or that you should compare yourself to what other people around you might be doing. For example, I think that there is a strong trend around some professional service industries to kind of craft a bit of a story that high performers should, go to uni, do combined law, or do a finance sort of degree and then get an early job with, a big four consultancy or something like that, and that's what success looks like. That's where high performers are meant to go. And I think the best thing that young people can do when they're thinking about how do I stand out is get a sense of what are my own interests, what about the world around me stimulates me to inquire further. What problems do I want to know more about? What sort of skills am I interested in developing as a person? Where would I like to be in a couple of years with my communication skills, or with my teamwork skills, or my leadership skills? What do I want to be able to talk about in 5 years? Like, oh yeah, I've become good at this, I've specialized in that. And if there are certain, sort of, I wouldn't say professions, but certain skill sets or pathways that have always seemed to resonate more with you, well then the best thing you can do to get an early start in them is to do something a little bit practical and give yourself a project or begin meeting people in those areas. The second thing I might say about that is that there are certain skills which are incredibly transferable across more and more workplaces, and those are around communication and teamwork. And one of the reasons for that is that many workplaces are having higher and higher demands on people who are coming into them to be able to step up right away and know how to communicate with clients or stakeholders, or know how to communicate internally between bosses and people below you as well, and how to take initiative, how to be a good team contributor, because they're going to have project work, or they're going to have, all kinds of tasks that maybe a team is collaborating on, and they need to be able to trust early on that you're going to be a heavy lifter in that sense. You're going to contribute and count yourself in. And I think lots of young people rock up at their first sort of job interviews or their first experiences in a workplace feeling very, very meek, like, oh, I don't know, I've got much to contribute here. And of course, in a literal sense, that might be true because you're at the start of your career journey. But what you can bring is a bit of a background if you've done things like debating, or maybe UN, or if you've had a leadership role at school on the SRC, or you've volunteered in local council. Those sorts of things will give you a kind of polish to your communication and a sense of what people's expectations are in a professional environment. And that's actually a huge differentiator that employers care a lot about when they're looking at entry roles in their teams.
Well, I've heard a quote about that from Warren Buffett, which was, invest in yourself. One easy way to become worth 50% more than you are now is to hone your communication skills. Coming from a background of debating and public speaking yourself, with a very long list of experiences, including being the master in charge of debating, public speaking, mock trial, mooting, and toastmasters at Knox Grammar School, along with co-founding Speaking Schools Australasia, which was formerly known as the Sydney Speaking School. How would you recommend that students increase their communication skills?
Well, I'm always going to be a really passionate advocate for debating. And I always laugh about the way that I ended up in it in the first place, which was not at all from this mindset we're talking about now, about how do I professionally develop and build my skills for the future economy. It was really that a good mate of mine kind of peer pressured me one day because they were short of judges at their Friday night competition. And he was like, we need some, not judges, sorry, chair people. We need someone just to come in and be a chairperson for the debate. And he was like, can you make it? Do you have anything on? And I said, no, but what do I have to do? It was like, you've got to be able to read a page, read a script. And I was like, oh, I can do that. So I rocked up and kind of enjoyed doing it, but I was much too scared to give speaking a try. And I proceeded to chairperson for 2 years, from year 8 to year 10, before I finally got the courage to, join the training, and eventually the coach kind of forced me into a speaking role. I discovered I enjoyed it, but still wasn't really passionate about it until kind of uni happened. And the only reason I continued at uni was partly I did it at high school, and partly it's skills that I wanted. I wanted to be better at speaking one day. Maybe you can still hear a bit of this, but in my voice, I've always, I think, had a bit of a mumble and a little bit of like getting things out, was always hard, and people were always asking me to repeat myself. So I really wanted to personally build on that. And I guess the reason I share that story is that speaking, I think, is something that it's very easy to hear grown-ups say, you should, of course, invest in your speaking skills. But for me, I mean, I had my mum telling me to do that since I was in year 5. And the reason I got involved was so entirely different and so entirely personal, and maybe that's a polite way of saying selfish. Like, I had to find my own reasons why I wanted to do it then, not why I should do it in future, but why I felt like doing it at the time. So how can young people develop their communication skills? Well, the first thing is everyone's going to be so different. And if you're the type of person who has the gift of the gab, well, then probably the thing you might be thinking about is, how do I get the skill of tailoring what I like to chat about and how I like to talk to the interests of a particular audience. So that might lead you to debating, because you end up having to work out what the other team's talking about and persuade a judge that what you've got to say is better. So you're not becoming very good at listening to the other side and tailoring for a judge who's trying to be someone impartial. That's the example that comes to mind for me, given my debating background, but there's a bunch of other ways you can get the exact same skill. Put yourself in any situation where you're going to have to tailor what you do to an audience. That's what you're going to be interested in. And that might be a leadership position, because you have to talk to a school community. It might be something in your local community, because you're going to have to learn to listen and work out who they are, what their interests are, and how you can adjust to that. If you're someone who's shy and talking isn't your thing, kind of hate the whole being in front of an audience sort of experience, well then, again, there are activities and, maybe smaller scale ways you can end up giving yourself a speaking role in things. So whether that's to do with an activity like future problem solving, or whether it's to do with like a yearbook committee where you give reports sometimes and you're speaking like to the exec of your school, you'll have a better sense of what those examples might be in your own life. If debating is around, it's still worth giving it a spin, because most of the time the only people in the room are the parents of you and the other team. But take the opportunities early, because the audiences are always smaller the younger you start, and over time you'll find that it gets easier. I think one of the reasons I found debating so helpful as well when it came to like confronting anxiety about audiences was, I think one of the biggest fears of public speaking is, oh no, what am I going to say? What if no words come? Or how will I know what to talk about? And that's definitely one thing debating solves for you, because it gives you exactly what to talk about, and then gives you, an hour or some time limit to quickly think up arguments that will support your side. But yeah, everyone will have a different sense of how they can move in the direction of improving their skills.
Well, you were very successful with your debating, even becoming a life member of the Macquarie University Debating Society. And with programs such as Toastmasters or Mooting, is it possible for students to apply individually if they want to do so independently? Because I've really only heard about it going through schools, and I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's a great question. I might just make one comment about the life membership of the Macquarie Uni Debating Society, which is, I think the way you said it, might sound like I must have been such a great debater for that to happen. I hadn't won any competitions at that point or anything like that. The reason that they recognized me with life membership was purely because I just been a really active person, and in particular, I'd taken the step to organize a camp, a residential debating and public speaking camp for a couple of years, and kind of having initiated a project in society and brought people together and just sort of driven a bit of change. That's really what they recognized there. And the reason I want to just pull out that for a minute is that that's an extremely transferable sort of situation to find yourself in. I think the experience I took from the Debating Society more than anything was people want to be led. And I don't mean that they want a president or something. I mean that they want people around them to set a good example and people to invite them to stuff, to include them in stuff. And it's almost too simple for most people to think about sometimes. But I had great people around me who were extremely encouraging of that sort of thing. And it certainly wasn't, me doing all the work at all. It was just getting a ball rolling and inviting people to contribute to something. So that's really the thing I take away there, which is always more important than the final skills or achievements you get, is the sort of getting a ball rolling in a group that you're already in. And the vast majority of early contributors to any project you have will not be, people you found on LinkedIn or social media. They'll be mates who you semi-peer pressured into helping you start something, and then they'll share it with their friends, or then they'll bring on the people who are kind of peripheral to them, and a few degrees of separation later you have a bit of a following, but it always starts with some favors. Anyway, the question was about things like mooting and toastmasters and things. Probably a key thing to say here is that the school I worked at was an extremely privileged school, and we had opportunities to really run things that I know are not available to everyone. A good example of that is the mooting competition. The mooting we did was run by Bond University, and that's a national comp. Right? It's been a couple of years, so it may be a bit different now. By the time any school could sign up to it, there was definitely a bit of, some similar schools who paid for good coaches were often the ones who were able to be the most successful at it, and the finals were always held up in at Bond University itself. But there were people who came from around the country doing that, and there were certainly many hundreds of schools who were actually involved in it. So even if you haven't got a great coach, or is only a teacher who's able to spend one much time a month or so with you, or there's a friend of a friend or a law student who's happy to give you a bit of a background in it. The only block in the way, if your school doesn't have anything there already, would be if you can have a conversation with a member of like the HESI department or a co-curricular teacher at your school and say, hey, there's something we're interested in doing. Would you be able to arrange for us to register and be involved in that? And see what steps you can take to at least, most schools, if the workload isn't too involved and the expense isn't too great, registering in the comp, they will be happy to support you doing that. Similarly with Toastmasters, we were very lucky. We had a local Toastmasters club who had a tradition of coming to the school and running a Toastmasters program for some of the boarders. A bit of a captive audience there. It was also part of the way the school was trying to help build the skills of the boarding students. But Toastmasters is incredibly widespread. There'll probably be a club in a suburb near you. They vary greatly in the sort of approaches they take, but in general, they're pretty casual environments that will let you in. Just take a check on what the registration fees might be in your area, and maybe they'll let you come to a few and get a taste for it before you actually sign up and commit. But you can definitely do that outside school very easily.
Now, taking a bit of a loop back to in school.
Yeah.
What are some small alterations to routines that you would recommend for students to increase their productivity?
Oh, so small alterations you can make for your productivity. I think there's one underlying principle here I mentioned, which is if you're the sort of person that struggles sometimes to manage your time, what you want is to make things as visible as possible, to stop storing your tasks or your obligations or your commitments just in your head. Get things written down, whether it is on a notepad, whether it's on a calendar, whether it's on your phone, whether it's in your diary, whether it's on a wall planner, somewhere where your decisions about your time are not necessarily any different from what they are now, but they're just recorded and they're visible. Make them exist in the physical world. And the reason that matters so much is that, unfortunately, our lizard brains are not great at time managing by themselves, usually. And it means that if things aren't written down, then what we do becomes a lot more driven by the heat of the moment. And you'll do your study or your less pleasant commitments when you feel like it. You often won't feel like it. And that just brings up that classic tension between your short and your long-term goals. You have a long-term goal to get a band 6 in English this year, but a short-term goal to watching the Netflix episode. And so, you won't necessarily just get somewhere by being cold turkey. I will no longer watch Netflix. But if things are recorded somewhere, well, then it can move your mindset into a more intentional sort of space. And you can be like, well, I want to be intentional about allocating this hour and a half of that day to Netflix. And it's there, but it's written down. It's not necessarily any different in what I might do, but it's written somewhere. And over time, you'll find that just that written record and that visibility helps you sort of mentally prepare yourself for the less pleasant things, and they'll become a slightly higher priority. But it's a bit of a brain hack in a way, because you're not starting from a point of, I should do this. And I think that word should is like an incredible source of pressure on us at all times. Like pretty much any time of the day, there'll be something you should be doing that's, a bit harder but less fun than what you're currently doing. So what we can really ask for ourselves is have a system that lets us be intentional about when our time goes. So find a system that works for you. You might be the sort of person where you never feel like your school diary in your whole life. I don't want to blemish that record. Go ahead, not filling out your diary, but find something so that you can be more intentional about when your time goes.
There's another thing which I personally used, and I just liked a bit of your input on it, which is about removing distractions.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah. Do you want to raise any particular challenge you've had around that? How's that been going?
My phone.
Your phone. Yeah. So some of the research we've done at Art of Smart about distraction is that it's pretty easy to identify what the 5 biggest distractors are for most high school students. And this goes all the way, like the top performers we've worked with also recognize that their main distractions come from the same sort of set. It's your phone, it's the internet, it's games of some kind, it's family or friends, or it's like media or the music you listen to. So we use the acronym PIG FM to sort of capture. Somewhere in that basket is probably the biggest source of the time that you lose. And look, this is a hard one, especially because there's always a good reason to have the distraction somewhere near you. Like maybe you can't disconnect your computer from the internet because, I need to research. Or, you can't leave your phone somewhere else because, I'm using it to time myself, or, I'm expecting a message or something like that. Again, coming back to that idea of where we can try and get ourselves into a more intentional mindset is, away from like a kind of being driven by the heat of the moment, is if we can make a decision early about exactly where that distraction is going to fit in the picture. Because if we're having this conversation at that point in time where you're in the middle of studying, your phone is beside you, well, that's, there's going to be a good reason why you've got to leave your phone there, and like it's much harder. You don't want to take it away just now because it's already there. But if we have a conversation now that next time you study, or just for this week when you study, the phone's going to remain in your bedroom while you study in the living room, well then maybe if you can make that commitment now, then all that remains for you to do in the moment is to just carry out what you committed earlier. So we're just trying to build that space between the intention and then the sort of the default that happens without an intention behind it. The simple strategy that lots of students use around a phone is what we call a no phone zone, which is to say, when I study, I'm going to have a blanket ban on the phone, and there's useful things I could do on it. I could have a study timer on it. I could maybe mitigate the risk of distraction with like flight mode or something like that. But actually, it doesn't have any benefits that are truly indispensable to me. So it's going to be in a different room, and I can stay there until the study block is finished. Now, for some people, that might still be something you can't execute all the time, or regularly, or maybe it'll last a day or two. In those cases, I think it still helps if you have a smaller rule about it. That is, I will do the no phone zone on Mondays. And then you can tell yourself on Monday that it's okay, like, I'm not committing to do this forever. That's kind of a daunting thing to commit to. This isn't the new me. This isn't the whole, say goodbye to it for the rest of the year. This is just a thing I'm going to implement on a very short time horizon. And I think sometimes if we can begin with those sorts of bargains with ourselves, that we're going to do this just for now, rather than begin and do it forever, then the barrier is a bit lower. And what we actually find very often is, having successfully executed the plan to do it on Monday, we end up on Tuesday or Wednesday kind of just voluntarily think, I might do it again. I got a bit of a boost from it. And that gives you a bit of a quick win. So I'd probably make that as a first suggestion. Try no phone zone and make a rule early that it is just for like 1 day a week, something like that.
Well, what's your opinion on sacrificing parts of your life for academics, especially in like the crucial stages of high school and university?
So, what counts as a sacrifice, I think, is important to drill into. One of the things we do in the program is we encourage people to set what we call 4-quadrant goals. That is, goals that definitely are about your academics, quadrant 1, but also about your friends and family, your social relationships, number 2. Third, about your personal well-being, your own health, and how you're traveling as a person. And then 4th, your career or university, tertiary study sorts of options. Those are just 4 categories we sort of found that help students to put their whole life into the picture somewhere. And the reason we start from that, this is becoming a bit of a theme perhaps in this interview, but it's to put people in the driver's seat so they can be intentional about where their priorities really are, and not feel like their whole journey in high school, especially year 12, is being controlled by the expectations or pressures from other people. And it can be important for some students themselves. I definitely met plenty of students through the program so far who, we talk to the students and be like, what do you want to do? And they'd say, I want to get band 6s and everything, and I want to try and top my year, or I want to get into this degree. And then we talk to their parents and they're like, well, we wouldn't mind if she spent a bit of time getting outside occasionally or saw her friends a bit more, but she's just really focused on this she wants to achieve here. And that's perfectly fine too. But, regardless of where you are, whether you're struggling in school or not interested in academics, or whether you're working out what you might have sacrificed to meet your academic goals, the purpose of the 4-quadrant sort of approach is that it just, again, gets things on the page, makes them visible. And you can then make trade-offs, but there'll be deliberate ones, not ones that are sort of foisted on you when you've fallen behind on things that are actually important to you and you feel you've got no choice but to let them go. There's a second and maybe more important thing I'd add, which is there can be a bit of an illusion around the idea of, I want to cut this co-curricular and this sport or this volunteer activity. I want to cut those things because if I can cut those 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 hours from my week, that will produce 5 or 6 new hours of study. And it's important to be realistic about all the factors in that equation, because it's not just a simple substitution of an hour of this for an hour for that. It never goes just 1-to-1. The way you have your whole routine constructed influences what you actually get out of any given hour. So really importantly, well, the very first assumption, the more hours of study you have, the better you do, is false. We've worked with students who are spending no more than 2 hours a day on their study, and get above 98 or 99 for their ATAR. And I'm not saying that's a result that's going to be available to everyone, but I am saying that lots of people have really inefficient study approaches. And if you can find ways to study smarter rather than harder, and we do a lot of those in the program, at a starting point, there are resources on the AltaSmart website, and there's an abundance of YouTube material if you want to find ways to try and make your own study routine a bit more efficient. Is that the premise that it's all about maximizing the volume of hours is not true. So that's important then, because the question about what do I have to sacrifice to achieve my academic goals, if you're looking at already 4 or 5 hours of study a day and you're like, that's not enough, I need to cut co-curriculars to get more, well, I don't know you're going to see that benefit. I think there's going to be diminishing returns in those additional hours you try to cram into your days in your week. The second factor I might just highlight quickly about that whole one-to-one substitution, can I cut this to produce more study, is that we need to find a study routine, especially if we're having this conversation with year 12 or even year 11, where it's actually going to be sustainable for us personally over that run. And sustainability for most people means continuing to feel like a human being during the course of year 12. And you won't feel satisfied, you won't feel like you have balance, you won't feel like you're healthy and well if you have put everything out and you're focusing only on your academics. You might get a term or two, or maybe even get to your trials on that approach, but you might struggle later.
Jumping back a bit to the 4 quadrant goals,
do
you believe that students place enough importance on their mental health?
It's funny. I think there's no doubt if you ask students what's one of the biggest issues facing me or facing my friends, facing my peers at school, there's a huge trend in awareness of this, and most people would say mental health is up there. But I think your question is getting at something important. Does that mean most students give it the right priority in their own lives?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people think it's very important, but then acting on it.
Absolutely. I think there's a big disconnect there. Everyone knows it's an issue. It's getting worse. We don't understand all the reasons why, but it is. And making the link, obviously we've made a lot of improvements over the last few years in addressing the stigma around it and conversation around mental health. Some students hopped in a time machine and went back 10 years and looked at the way mental health was discussed at schools and around students before, they'd be horrified at the level of stigma. And that's not at all to downplay how much further we have to go in those conversations, but it's so much radically better, and a large part of that is because of how brave many people have been in talking openly about their experiences and chipping away bit by bit at the stigma that used to be stifling and is gradually improving around mental health. But yeah, one of the biggest areas for change there is actually translating that, popular awareness that it is an issue, for others, but taking steps that, for me personally might be unpleasant or might be challenging or might be stressful. I think one of the phrases I've heard around this that really resonates with me is act with urgency before the emergency. And that means being proactive about thinking about what your mental health is going to be like if you continue on the current trajectory without any changes, and using that as a kind of imperative to be like, okay, how do I put in place the supports, the balance, the structures that I will need so that whatever I've got is going to be sustainable into the future. So I think that's very strongly linked to the previous question about sacrificing everything for academics. For example, lots of students feel the pressure to do exactly that, but the trade-off only becomes clear when you're much further down the path. It's a bit like the smoking that can have short-term benefits for some people, but long-term, obviously, it leads to cancer among other problems. It's about making decisions now before the trade-offs become really harmful and really apparent. It's thinking very intentionally, how do I make sure I'm in a good, fit mental state in the course of my routine? Practically, what that means is balance. It is some of the more boring things we've all heard adults lecture us on about sleep and diet and exercise. The reason adults harp on about them is they're true. And if you have even small amounts of those that you can integrate into your routine, even if you need to sort of leave a breadcrumb trail for yourself and use rules like I mentioned before, where it's going to be, I'm going to get to bed by 11 o'clock one day a week, or, read before bed rather than use a screen before bed to help make that easier. If you can find ways to frame those small things that will help nudge you more towards a slightly healthier and more sustainable routine, then the payoffs won't be obvious because you won't see the darker timeline, but they'll be very, very real, even so. So absolutely encourage people to, if you're even tacitly aware of some of the things you could do, a small step in that direction, take this opportunity now at the start of the year to make even a small commitment to take one of those steps.
Well, I think two strategies as well. Well, a couple of strategies would just be like journaling and meditation, really easy ones, and you can like routine them in.
Absolutely.
So you don't forget to do them, because a lot of strategies end up like, yes, they're very good, but when do I actually
do them? So I actually did a small version of this. There's an app I have called Gratitude, which is a little gratitude diary that you can make, and you can give yourself different prompts as well, depending on how you're feeling, or select from some of the ones they give you. I wanted to do that every single day 2 years ago when I first got the app, and that lasted probably like a month, which is pretty good, I reckon. But I found myself last year just occasionally, after a particularly good day or a particularly bad day, like logging onto the app and just writing a few notes on how I was feeling. And then when it came to set my resolutions for this year, what I did was said I want to have 2 entries a month. So again, one of those simple low stakes rules that means there's no pressure on me to do it every single day or even every single week, but just have it in the back of my mind. There's going to be some intentionality around making that happen. And I think none of us can undertake to start from tomorrow executing a perfect routine, but we can maybe little bargain for ourselves to have a better routine rather than a worse one.
Now, doing a bit of a jump back again to employment. You've worked under 2 federal MPs. Now, how exactly did you land your jobs?
That's a great question. Depends where you want to start the story, but one place it actually starts is at university. I jumped into a program called Mentors at Macquarie, which is the academic orientation program at Macquarie University when I was an undergraduate student. And someone I met through there was involved in the local branch of the political party. And it wasn't why we connected at all. We had a bunch of other stuff in common, it turned out. And we had coffee one day and we were talking about career directions. And actually at the time, my undergrad my degree was in politics and international relations because I wanted to be a political journalist. And when I mentioned that to her, she was like, well, I don't know any roles in journalism at the moment, but I could probably get you an internship in one of the MP's offices, because she worked in another MP's office and happened to know someone was looking. So it was a kind of a network thing, really. She knew someone who was looking for someone, and I reckoned that I could put my name forward for it. So that's what happened. And in that MP's office, it was just like a unpaid internship sort of thing. They'd just done a postcard campaign to the whole electorate, and the electorate has 100,000 constituents. So they received a lot of postcards back, and they wanted to record these responses so that they could then actually it was a bit of a campaign. They were going to take those responses to the then Prime Minister's office, as a sort of petition. And so this was a spreadsheet monkey, data entry sort of role. But by rocking up, by being reliable, they found they had some other work that needed doing with regards to a bunch of admin tasks. Nothing fancy at all. It was often like doing mail outs and envelope stuffing, and lots of unglamorous work happens to make elected offices function. But it gave me a casual role to help out with those admin tasks for a day or two per week. That's all that was. And along the way, I ended up taking some photos when the MP visited various constituent groups and so on. I had a nice camera, I was interested in photography. And then after I'd left, after about a year out of that, I found myself getting a bit more involved in the local party, and one day I got a phone call because another MP had just been elected a few months prior and was still in the process of sort of staffing his office, and found himself hosting an afternoon tea for local sporting champions who were receiving grants from the government, and they didn't have anyone with a camera or anyone who could take photos. And they'd heard from this other MP's office that I might be available and live locally, so could I drop by in about 2 hours' time to take some photos? And not being an idiot, I said, yeah, of course. And so I went around, took the photos, and then the MP was like, oh, thanks so much for coming to do this. What are you doing at the moment? And at the time I was working part-time at the high school in the debating program, but I was about to finish my degree and looking to find full-time work. I'd had a few job applications and interviews and things that had come close but not quite materialized yet. So I told him very directly, I'm looking for work. And he was like, well, I don't know if I've got anything for you at this point, but please do send in your resume. Let's keep that on file. And so I did that. And then they had me in again to do, similar to the previous MP, just coming in a couple of days a week, helping out with responding to constituent correspondence, because there is an endless amount of that. And when I had done that for a little while, they invited me to apply for one of the jobs they were creating in the office. They were creating one job for media advising and one job for the community liaison sort of role. I applied kind of with their nudging. I was moved less to the media one, more to the community relations one. Wasn't successful, get up to someone else. But they said, I'd just like to keep you on as doing some of the choreo if you can. And so I did that for 6 months, and then eventually there was an opening in that role, and I moved into that, and that was my first actual full-time job. So it was very incidental. It wasn't one simple step.
Well, working in media as both an officer and an intern, if you had to give a brief description of what it's like to work in media, what would you say?
I guess I wouldn't say I quite worked in media. I wasn't one writing the press releases or thing. I was sort of in the office where those things were happening. And it depends a great deal on where you are. It was the question about, what are your day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, kind of. What would a person have to do, really?
To get into media and things like that.
And what would they do once they have the job, that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. So if you are interested in media and communications, probably the best thing you can do is lots of writing practice, because part of your role will be churning out media releases or perhaps speeches. And I know that for this particular office I worked in, the part of the application process often involved give us a draft of a speech. We're going to give you a title. You're going to be, meeting some people for, this MP is going to be attending an Anzac Day function or a local gathering of this community group or Rotary or whatever it might be, and what would you have him say on that occasion? So, generally investing in your writing skills, whether it is starting a blog, whether it is submitting articles to get published in an online outlet, Junkie, or submit straight to the ABC or Guardian or wherever you like. But get that writing practice, that discipline, that feedback from editors, work out what gets published and what doesn't. That's definitely one advantage. The second thing, though, for any job that you're applying for is research. And that was absolutely critical. I know that in one of the MP's offices I worked for, one of the people, this MP had published a book, and one of my colleagues there mentioned that in applying for his role, he just took pains in the job interview to make it clear he had read the book. Just dropped a few things here and there that made it clear, he'd done that. More broadly, most MPs will have policy interests. They'll have certain, themes they come back to, things they like to campaign on. That'll all be on their website or their social media. Go to those places first, and so you go into that interview knowing what they're after, what are the problems that person is interested in addressing, and what are the things you would be able to help them do to meet their goals. So the interview is really about their needs rather than just you. And I'm saying that from a perspective of an MP's office, but that is true wherever you go, because almost every organisation these days is hiring communications people to pump out press releases, help with marketing, social media, online, SEO, all of those things. So it's partly about giving yourself some practice and experience with those skills, but it's also about the research you do that really helps you get your foot in the door.
Well, that would be my last question. So, in summary, just to summarize everything we've covered today, the most important things would be to work out your own success, pursue your interests, and try to find problems, and look at hybridization and the direction of fields that you are interested in. Try and get a sampling of a wide variety of industries, and try to build transferable skills such as communication. And then for more of studying school perspective, we have make your tasks visible and written down, and make sure that you look at them. Don't just write them down and shove them away. Create strategies beforehand to counter distractions. Focus on sustainability and watch your mental health. And finally, for a job in media, the most important things would be writing practice, background research, and focusing on their needs rather than what you want to get. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or
that's a fantastic summary, a great chronicle of what we've talked about. No, that's fantastic. Thanks, Ali.
Well, thank you for joining me, Daniel. It's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so much, Ali. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ali. Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ali. Appreciate it.